glad you've been joining with us, hopefully, all along since we've started these well over a year ago now. It's been going on for quite a while, but it is a good time to connect with all of you at home and offer a little bit of encouragement and focus your mind on the Word each and every week in a nice little midweek scenario. So thanks for being here. Before we get started, though, let me remind you of what's going on this upcoming Sunday. This Sunday, we have both an indoor service at 8:45 as well as our outdoor service at 10. So if you haven't registered yet, please do so. Go online, let us know which of the services you'll attend, or you can attend both. You are welcome to do so. And we would love to see you. So fill out those forms. Make sure you get that coming. And then, as Pastor's been reminding you via email, be looking forward to our gathering together on the 30th, on May 30th. When on May 30th, we're going to move all of our services back indoors. We're going to have the morning 8:45, and then we're going to have the secondary morning at 10:30 that day. So 2 services. That first service will be extra distanced, extra spaced out. So if you want to be a little more on the cautious side and have a little more room, that would be definitely the service to go to. The other service, we're gonna get as many in there as we can. So we definitely need you to register for that 30th, because we're gonna have a very specific seating chart for everyone to make sure we get as many bodies in there as possible. But we do look forward to celebrating kind of our little summer kickoff like we've always done, right? Do a little summer kickoff that day, have our 2 services, followed up by then our barbecue outdoors. So we'll, as a church, we'll be providing the hot dogs and the buns and condiments and things. And we're just asking you as families to then bring whatever sides and drinks that your specific family wants to have. So we can't do a lot of sharing. We can't have a big potluck yet. So this is our step, though, towards getting back together. So bring your own food, your own sides, your own drinks. Bring your lawn chairs, because we have a limited picnic table space out there. But if you want some lawn chairs or blankets to set on, bring those. Stick around. If you came to the morning service, you can come back. We'd love to see you. But we do look forward to getting back to indoor services, a little more of a familiar setting again. And we're excited to see what God has. Also, just in the random, because I work with the teens and the youth group and the Thrive. Last night we had our first in-person Thrive meeting in well over a year now, and it was a great time. So we had 10 young adults, really, now, who all gathered, and we sat out at those same picnic tables last night from 6:30 to 8. We had a great time just catching up on life with one another, spending time in the Word, in our study together, and then just enjoying some game time outside. So it was really good. Thank you to those who were praying for us. God definitely answered your prayers. He always does. But it was a really enjoyable time for me personally, but then also for the teens. It was good to see all those faces back at it together. Well, this morning we're going to continue looking at some of the background characters of the Bible, the minor characters and the major lessons that they can teach us. And today we actually have multiple characters that we're looking at, but they kind of just get lumped into one. And we're going to find our characters in the book of Numbers. So go with me to Numbers chapter 26. As you turn to Numbers 26, I'll set the context of this chapter and where we've been. Numbers 26 begins the census of the generation of Israelites that is about to enter the Promised Land. When the book of Numbers ends, it really ends chronologically, right at the time before Moses is about to die, and right before Joshua is about to assume command and take the people in. The book of Deuteronomy gives us some of those last few details that are going on, as well as the retelling of the law. But Numbers does give us a nice chronological look at the wanderings of the Israelites from when they left Egypt to the 40 years after they've spent wandering the wilderness to get them to where they need to finally be. Well, chapter 26 follows the census, or details the census of who is going to be entering this Promised Land. And specifically, in verse 4, as God is speaking with Moses and Eleazar, says, "Take a census of the people from 20 years old and upward, as the Lord commanded Moses." And then he's going to go on and say who the people are. So God is having a census of who are the the new generation, or that young generation, 40 years prior, who were under 20, that were not killed off in the wilderness, that young group, and then all of their descendants since then are being counted to total the number of people in Israel. I want to jump down, though, to verse 28. So the way it works is Moses details, as he's writing, the different clans, the different tribes. So each of the 12 tribes is listed along with the descendants underneath. We're jumping down here to the tribe of Manasseh. So verse 28 says, the sons of Joseph, according to their clans, Manasseh and Ephraim. The sons of Manasseh, of Machir, the clan of the Machirites. And Machir was the father of Gilead. Of Gilead, the clan of the Gileadites. These are the sons of Gilead. Of Ezer, the clan of the Ezerites. Of Helek, the clan of the Helekites. Of Asriel, the clan of the Asrielites. Of Shechem, the clan of the Shechemites. And of Shemida, the clan of the Shemadites. And of Hepher, the clan of the Hepherites. This is really riveting stuff, I know. Bear with me. Verse 33. Now Zelophehad, the son of Hepher, had no sons but daughters. And the names of the daughters of Zelophehad were Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. These are the clans of Manasseh, and those listed were 52,700. Our minor characters for the day are going to be these daughters of the man Zelophehad. Now, this is a really curious inclusion in this list, because if we were to actually read through the entire list of names, which I will not do, and I will spare you. Also, I will spare myself, so I don't look like a fool tripping up on names. But if we were to read through this list, we would not read of daughters or women really of any regard. The census, as we see it counted through, really is focused on the male tribal leaders. Yet here we have the inclusion of these daughters. And the reason that they're included is because of the next chapter and the events that take place. Chapter 27 is, it naturally comes after chapter 26, but it's really an extension of this census taking. So as the census, as these heads of families are being counted, as they're looking at the different clans that are inside of each tribe, the different father figures and then their descendants, and counting out, what they're doing is they're preparing to parcel out the promised land to these different tribes. Each tribe is going to get an allotment that fits the size of their tribe. So if you have a larger tribe, you will get a larger piece of land so that everybody has a place to live. If you have a smaller tribe, you will get a smaller allotment of land because you don't need the space. And then once the tribe is designated their land, then inside of the tribe, the clans are going to get their portions of property. Property that is going to stay within their family heritage, stay as an inheritance to their descendants forever. As God had directed in his word. The land was to be his people's, and the land was not to move or to be transferred. Well, chapter 27 rolls around then. Follow along with me. It says this, then drew near the daughters of Zelophehad, the son of Hepher, son of Gilead, son of Machir, son of Manasseh, from the clans of Manasseh, the son of Joseph. The names of his daughters were, again, Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. It says, and they stood before Moses and before Eleazar the priest and before the chiefs and all the congregation at the entrance of the tent of meeting, saying, our father died in the wilderness. He was not among the company of those who gathered themselves together against the Lord in the company of Korah, but died for his own sin. And he had no sons. Why should the name of our father be taken away from his clan because he had no son? Give us a possession among our father's brothers. These 5 ladies recognized that there was going to be a problem once they entered that promised land. Now, there had not been a problem up until this point. As they have been wandering in the wilderness, and as they have been moving from place to place, and their clans are setting up their tents, and they're moving when God moves, and they're staying when God has them stay, God has been providing for them every day. Their meals are provided for them. They are in their clan, in their tent. They have a place to move. They don't have land. They don't have permanent homes. They have tents that are movable, and they have dwellings. And their daily provisions are met by the Lord. They aren't working in fields. They don't have husbands that are working in fields or living off of their father. God's providing their food. However, once they enter the promised land, that's going to change. They're going to need a home. And as it stands right now, these women, and really their father, as a bigger picture, they are not going to have any home of their own in the land that God's going to give to the tribe of Manasseh, because they don't have a male heir to accept the land and to be head over the land. And so these girls, these women, have a problem. And they've got a couple options of what they could do. They could either sit back on the sidelines and hope this thing just works out on itself. I mean, they're well aware of the law. They've made that clear. They understand that the law says that the land is being given to these clans, these tribes, like these fathers and the brothers and the sons, that it's going to the men. And they realize that as it stands right now, they don't actually have a claim to the land themselves. So they could sit back and hope that everything pans out, or they could step forward and say something. Now for us, it might not seem as big a deal to step forward and say something, but remember the context of where we are. I mean, we're in ancient Israel. I mean, the nation itself isn't even in their land yet. They're wandering the wilderness. And up until this point, the only woman that we have seen that enters into the discussion when it comes to Moses and the high priest Eleazar and the chiefs, the only woman that we've ever seen talking with that group is Miriam, Moses' sister, who has since died. Up until that point, though, the decisions have all been made by the leaders that God has established with the men. And so these women, though, realize that they need to make their case. Now, I should pause. At this point in time, and if you were to look up the daughters of Zelophehad, do a little internet search for them, you're going to see a lot of modern writers talk about female empowerment here and how they are just breaking gender norms, and they are paving the way for women's rights. And what they are doing is very courageous and bold, but it's not because they were doing it for themselves. It was not because they were taking a stand for women and they were trying to make laws that favored women in the land of Israel. It's because they had an understanding of God's grace. They understood that God was there to protect and provide for the widows and the orphans and for those who were destitute. I mean, we could look through the rest of the law and we could see the different ways in which God made provisions for family to be taken care of. The way that even the farmers were to harvest their fields in a specific way so that those who were poor could come and they could work on the outsides and they could get the gleanings to provide for themselves. God had always made provisions for people to be protected. And these women understood that God would have a provision for them. There would be some way that God would meet their need and make sure that they were provided for. And their cause isn't even give us something to take care of ourselves. Their cause is we don't want our Father's name to be forgotten. We don't want him to be wiped out completely from the family lineage and from the history of Israel. They were not going with this desire to make a name for themselves. They were really going ultimately because they knew that God was gracious and merciful, that God would provide, and they wanted to make sure that their father's name and their family's name had the same representation that God had promised that they would have. And so these women boldly come forward. Now, think about this. Think about the setup. Moses and Eleazar and the chiefs are all congregating together and gathering. The congregation is out here, and out walk these 5 ladies to go meet with them. That would have taken some serious guts. I mean, people have a hard time just walking in front of any kind of a small crowd. They're stepping in front of the entire congregation of Israel to go approach Moses and the leadership to present their case. But they go ahead and they do it. And their claim is this: we don't have any land. there's no way that we will have a provision. No, they do notice, or they do make notation, I should say, of their father. They clarify that he was not one of the ones who died in the rebellion, in Korah's rebellion. So their father was not one who had a disrespect for God's law, as it were, in that sense. If you remember in Korah's rebellion, the case was, why is it that Aaron's descendants are the only high priests and the Levites get this special privilege? All the nation of Israel are holy. And so Korah, the Levite, along with Dathan and Abiram, who were Reubenites, all got together and tried to make this claim that the Levites were no more special than them, that the priestly line doesn't stick exclusive with Aaron, and God severely punished those who rebelled and beyond. It appears from this passage then that some of the people that were in that rebellion perhaps also lost privileges of having rights in the land. We can't make that case for sure, but the fact that these girls bring up their father did not rebel makes me think that those who did rebel had even further consequences down the line than they thought. So they note that their father wasn't a rebellious one, but also that he was still a sinner. Because they say that he died because of his own sin. He was one of the individuals that refused to enter the land of Canaan when they were in the wilderness, when they were at Kadesh. They were the ones that rebelled against Moses and Joshua and Caleb's advice to go and conquer the land. So he was guilty of sin, and he did die in the wilderness for it. But his daughters point out that he wasn't even more of a rebellious individual. And the fact that they have no chance unless God intervenes. So we see these women are honest because they're going to be very clear about who their father is. But we also see that they're pious because they knew the law. Remember, the law's not written down. They didn't pick up their Bible and, do some case study law. They had to have heard it from Moses as he is telling it to them. And they kept in mind, and they were sharp enough to realize that if things don't change, we're going to be in trouble. Well, as it goes on then, verse 5, it says, Moses then brought their case before the Lord. Now, if you think back, if you remember early on as the Israelites were making their way from Egypt, Moses got a little bogged down with dealing with all of the complaints of the people and all the issues that were going on. His father-in-law was the one who advised him to set up essentially a lesser judges that could take care of the small claims and let the big cases come to him. Well, this case is a legitimate enough case and a legitimate enough claim that Moses takes it and then takes it to the Lord. I think he too even realized there's a problem here and that God is going to make some kind of a provision for these women. Verse 6 then says, the Lord said to Moses, the daughters of Zelophehad are right. That would be a great feeling if you were those women to hear that they were right in what they said. Now there are liberal commentators that will look at this and they'll point to the fact like, well, you know what, God got corrected by the women, or he messed up because his law wasn't perfect yet and now he had to perfect it. But that's not the case at all. God is establishing his law throughout the entire time while they're in the wilderness and throughout their wanderings, and he's establishing it piece by piece. And here is a great example of a law needed to be enacted that prior didn't have to exist. They didn't have any land prior to entering the promised land. There was nothing to divide up, and yet here now as they're approaching that time, we need to clarify some rules. And so God, though, recognizing their right, grants them their request. He says, you shall give them an inheritance among their father's brothers and transfer the inheritance of their father to them. They get their case. They get their claim. They get to be landowners, as it were. They will receive the inheritance as if they were sons of their own father. But God doesn't stop there. He doesn't just make this a one-time exception to the rule. He establishes this is going to be the ongoing plan. He says, and you shall speak to the people of Israel, saying, if a man dies and has no son, then you shall transfer his inheritance to his daughter. If he has no daughter, then he shall transfer his inheritance to his brothers. If he has no brothers, he shall give it to his father's brothers. And if his father has no brothers, then you shall give his inheritance to the nearest kinsman of his clan, and he shall possess it. And it shall be for the people of Israel a statute and rule, as the Lord commanded Moses. These women's bravery in coming forward and presenting this case before Moses led to the establishment of a law that was going to be kept in Israel forevermore. And for the people out there who want to criticize the Bible and talk about how anti-woman the Bible is, and and how patriarchal it is, and the problems, look at this. After the son, instead of it going to another male heir, it's immediately going to go to the daughters forever. Women have always been held in high regard in the Lord's eyes, and even in the Old Testament, women were not overlooked. And here we have established then a new law in the land of how the succession of an inheritance will go. And a lot of that comes down to these 5 women who made their case and I don't say presumed upon God's grace. Usually say we presume upon God's grace, it's a bad thing. We're presuming upon God's grace to not punish us for sin. But they recognize that God is a gracious and loving and merciful and compassionate God, and he is going to assist his people. And God's desire was for his people to be in the land and to have that property, and so God was going to make that happen one way or another. And he did, and then codified it in the law. But the story of these daughters does not end here. They did receive the victory, which is great, but their name pops up for a 3rd time now in the book in Numbers 36. Numbers 36 is the last chapter of the book, and this is how the whole account ends. Look at verse 1. It says, the heads of the fathers' houses of the clan of the people of Gilead, the son of Machir, son of Manasseh, from the clans of the people of Joseph, came near and spoke before Moses and before the chiefs, the heads of the fathers' houses of the people. So they are in the same tribe. They're all in the tribe of Manasseh, but this is a different clan. This is the clan of the Gileadites. So this is not directly related to Zelophehad's daughters. But here's the concern the Gileadites had. Verse 2. The Lord commanded my Lord to give the land for inheritance by lot to the people of Israel, and my Lord was commanded by the Lord to give the inheritance of Zelophehad, our brother, to his daughters. But if they are married to any of the sons of the other tribes of the people of Israel, then their inheritance will be taken from the inheritance of our fathers and added to the inheritance of the tribe into which they marry. So it will be taken away from the lot of our inheritance. And when the Jubilee of the people of Israel comes, then the inheritance will be added to the inheritance of the other tribe into which they marry. And their inheritance will be taken from the inheritance of the tribe of our fathers. Whew. There's a lot of inheritanceing in there. The Gileadites recognized there might be a problem with the current solution. It wasn't because of these women. The complaint is not about these daughters. It's just about the other laws of the land. And so if these women were to marry outside of their tribe, if they were to say go to the tribe of Simeon and marry a Simeonite, well, the Simeonite husband would become essentially an owner of that piece of land. And then when the year of Jubilee came, every 50 years, when they wouldn't reapportion the land, but that land would then get assumed into the tribe of Simeon. So now you've got the land of Manasseh with a little plot in the middle that belongs to another tribe. And so the issue was that God's tribal allotments would get mixed up because of women owning the property, because eventually they would have sons, and those sons wouldn't be Manassites, they would be Simeonites or the other tribe, and so the allotments would get mixed up and broken. So Moses, speaking on behalf of the Lord, comes up with a solution. He says, the tribe of the people of Joseph is right, and this is what the Lord commands concerning the daughters of Zelophehad. Let them marry whom they think best. Which, let me stop right there. Speaking of women's rights, and people saying that women look down upon the Bible, these daughters get the right to choose whom they're going to marry. I'm not going to elaborate a lot on that, but that is a very significant point that I don't think a lot of people look at. The women have a voice in who they're marrying. They weren't just pieces of property sold off. They were important in God's eyes. They are important in God's eyes. Let them marry whom they think best. Only they shall marry within the clan of the tribe of their father. The inheritance of the people will not be transferred one tribe to another, for every one of the people of Israel shall hold on to the inheritance of the tribe of his fathers. Every daughter who possesses an inheritance in any tribe of the people of Israel shall be wife to one of the clan of the tribe of her father, so that every one of the people of Israel may possess the inheritance of his fathers. God made it really clear. The women are free to marry whomever they so desire, but if a daughter is a rightful heir to inheritance, the rightful property owner, she must marry within her tribe, must marry another Manassite, as it were. That way, the descendants would still be descendants of Manasseh. The property would still stay within the right family lines, and that way, the allotments would stay intact as God designed. Now, I want to bring up a small little detail here. The Gileadites are bringing up an issue that when these girls marry, there could be an issue, which means this: none of these daughters were married. Now, I can't give you the exact age of these daughters, but typically in Jewish culture, women were married at very young ages. Like, they were married in their teens. These daughters probably weren't 20, 30 years old. I mean, they probably were not older women who were just like single and well off and taking care of themselves. They were probably pretty young. And it was these young women that understood God's word and understood God's love and understood God's grace and his provision that were willing to take a stand. And now here they have a stipulation laid upon them. You get the land, but you have to marry within the clan of your father. You got to stay. It's going to limit the pool of people you get to marry. And notice how the book of Numbers ends. Verse 10 says, the daughters of Zelophehad did as the Lord commanded Moses. For Mahlah, Tirzah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Noah, the daughters of Zelophehad, were married to sons of their father's brothers. They were married into the clans of the people of Manasseh, the son of Joseph, and their inheritance remained in the tribe of their father's clan. These are the commandments and the rules the Lord commanded through Moses to the people of Israel in the plains of Moab by the Jordan at Jericho. The book of Numbers ends with the obedience of these 5 women. Now, if we were to read the entire book of Numbers, the book of Numbers is filled with example after example after example of complaining, grumbling against the Lord, grumbling against Moses and the leadership, the rebellion of Korah, the people's rebellion at Kadesh Barnea. If we were to read even Numbers 25, right before we met the daughters of Zelophehad, Numbers 25 recounts the instance where the nation of Israel, the men started intermarrying with the Moabite women around them. They failed to follow God's commands of the proper people to marry, and brought about a curse upon the nation. A plague swept through. Yet here we end the book with the example of these 5 young women who are obeying God's commands. It ends in a very uplifting note for the book, and from, as many would say, the unlikely instance, the unlikely individuals. It's from these young women who, just a few chapters earlier, would have been destitute without any property to their name because they were only women, yet they were still God's children, and God loved them and provided for them, and we see that they are godly women and godly examples. Their names come up one more time in Scripture. Their names are brought up a lot, considering who they are and where they lived, and they're brought up again in the book of Joshua. After the conquest has finished, or mostly finished, I should say, and the allotments are pieced out for each tribe to then go in and finish the task of the conquest. In Joshua 17, verses 3 through 6, in the allotments for Manasseh, we get another short retelling of these women and the assurance that they did receive the land that was rightfully theirs. I think here what we have is we have a great example of these women who understood God's love for them and understood that the law was there for their good, and that God was going to use the law to protect and to help them. And so they were willing to follow God's law and follow God's instruction for them. I mean, even as they ended the book here, they happily agreed to commit with the Lord and to do what he said because they trusted him. And for me, I mean, I think, even thinking through my own life and even for you at home, do you trust the Lord in the same way? Do you trust that he's going to provide the ways that he says he's going to provide for you? Do you trust that he is the ultimate source of joy and that living for him is worth far more than any of the riches or the things that the world has to promise? Do you trust that it is better to lose your life for the sake of Christ than to keep it for yourself? These women clearly did. They clearly believed that it was worth it to follow the Lord because they knew who their God was. They knew that he was a trustworthy God, that he was a loving God, that he was a good God, and they lived their lives to follow him. And I trust that we can do the same. Well, thank you again for joining us on this Thursday. Be sure to sign up again for Sunday, inside 8:45, outside at 10 a.m.